My good friend, who many of you know, Wagner, pastor of Christmas Lutheran, one of the great theologians with naivety of the region. Mitri has been given the speech I heard 2 years ago, and I bet a lot of you have heard it. I call it the too much speech. How many have heard that too much speech? Only one? Okay. He said, we've had too much peace talk and no peace. Too much negotiation, as we're just seeing now. No change on the ground. We're getting too much in terms of donations, and we're becoming a dependent people. We're living in our little own cantons in this apartheid system with the illusion that things are okay because we got our cell phones, we got our theaters, we can go to restaurants, but we're stuck under occupation behind walls in the system. Too much good stuff is creating the illusion for many and a dependency. And we got to get back to fighting this occupation and asserting ourselves for self-determination. And then he says, we've had too much religion in the Holy Land. I'm walking around like a televangelist now. I'm not. Can everybody hear okay in the back?
It's a very good system, though. Much better than the podium.
Too much religion in the Holy Land. And now we're seeing the hard-line, ultra-Orthodox extremists in government like Lieberman and the others. We see it reflected in Islam, that sometimes mirrors the same. But what I want to talk about is the too much bad religion of Christian Zionism. And that's where I want to go this morning. And then I'm going to talk about two types of Christian Zionism. I grew up in the fundamentalist type. And here I want to be precise about words. Don't use evangelical Christian Zionism. The mainstream press uses that. The evangelical movement is a broad spectrum of many different theologies. I count myself as an evangelical, but most won't accept me. I'm a Sojourner's Justice evangelical. That's a growing movement. I've seen it in my students. There's an evangelical center. Many are susceptible to the Christian fundamentalist Zionist arguments. That's the large center. The hard right fundamentalists is where the Christian Zionist movement has really taken root. But if you note, nobody has hard statistics on this. There are probably 90 million evangelicals in this country. It may be higher because in our mainline denominations, the fastest growing churches, be they Presbyterian, Lutheran, Methodist, are often evangelical in their orientation. So we may be talking about over 100 million evangelicals. We don't know. But the fundamentalists are only about 20%. But they have 90% control of the religious broadcasting system. It has been that way. They were always ahead of the mainline churches in their use of technology. So the hard right, fundamentalist Christian Zionism, that's the most visible, it's the best organized, the best funded. So let me begin by talking about this movement, which I grew up in. I began to see the light, even in junior high and high school, of the inconsistencies in it. But this type of Christian Zionism is not just a theology. Very few in this movement really are systematic about their theology. But they kind of get caught up in it. My family's a good example. My mother keeps telling me, Don, give up on Palestine. It's not going to be solved until Jesus returns after the rapture. that kind of utilitarian thing, but that end-time perspective. You can't do anything about it, it's predetermined. And besides, anyone who goes against Israel will not be blessed. Genesis 12:3. I gave up. Mom's almost 95 now, you know. We just don't talk about that. Stephen Sizer, great analyst who did the hard research on this, says Christian Zionism is Christians who support Zionism. It's a very basic definition. I think you can get more precise as you go on. There's different types, which I'll get into. But that can be material and economic support. You have Christian Zionist churches in Colorado funding settlements and raising tax-exempt money through their churches and sending it to settlements and encouraging settlement. You can have just a vague kind of cultural Christian Zionism. Folks who have read the Left Behind series just kind of slip into this. Or, you know, folks who, from the time the book Exodus, the novel Exodus came, with the movie with Paul Newman, just supported Israeli exceptionalism. That would be a cultural type of support. And then there's the political, which both is coming up in Christians United for Israel, John Hagee, who's quite extreme, by the way. If you can stand to watch him, I encourage you. Christians United for Israel. They now have organizations in every state in the country that work hand in glove with AIPAC on pro-Israel issues. Now I want to raise the question. Some have been writing Christian Zionism is in decline. It was a fad. Christian Zionism ebbs and flows through history, and often it peaks at a millennial year or at a centennial year, at the turn of the century. In 1800, there was a flowering of Christian Zionism in England. We saw in 2000, the Left Behind series came out just before, during, and after 2000. 66 million copies sold, now it's being translated in other countries. So there's many different types of support. And it's not always a clear theological support. But what I want to talk about mainly today is bad religion, bad theology, and a few of the dangers of Christian Zionism. So staying with this first type, let me just go back and review a few things in history. I usually do this in the PowerPoint. I'm just going to race through a couple of points here. And to show you the influence and the nature of fundamentals of Christian Zionism. It begins really in England. In my research, I read a document in the British Museum when I was writing the book Anxious for Armageddon. And the first, earliest form of it I saw was 1585. The Reverend Thomas Wagner, who called for the creation of a Jewish state. He was a restorationist type of Christian Zionist. He wanted to see the Jews restored to Israel and then converted by the Anglicans, so that God would bless the Anglicans in the British Empire. He was not around long because his views were not accepted. But in 1621, Sir Henry Finch, who was like the Attorney General of Parliament and a parliamentarian, was the first to bring it to Parliament to call for the British to support a Jewish state in Palestine. 1621. It phased out. Now, Robert Smith, who many of you know, has just completed his doctoral dissertation on Christian Zionism. I had lunch with him last week. He takes it back and has uncovered earlier material than I have, going back to the 1540s and 50s. But what he shows is